It's a call to action for us as leaders to say, who are we spending our time with? Who are we investing our money with, and why?
Welcome to today's National Roundtable on Canada's early stage capital gaps. I'm Claudio Rojas, CEO of the National Angel Capital Organization, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days. We have nearly 1,000 participants joining from across the country, angel investors, founders, fund managers, and champions of Canada's innovation economy. This roundtable follows an intensive 9-month consultation process with over 250 senior leaders across Canada's innovation economy, and the federal government's $750 million commitment in Budget 2025 to supporting Canadian firms facing early growth stage funding gaps. These consultations shape the development of NACO's Unified Capital Strategy Report, published in October 2025, with more recent consultations inspiring an editorial piece we've just released on vision.nacocanada.com. Next week, we'll be releasing a report with Startup Genome that puts hard numbers to what many of you in this room have been living. The challenging fundraising environment at all stages, entrepreneurs, fund managers across the entire innovation pipeline, but particularly at the pre-seed and seed stage, which drives later stage outcomes. Between 2019 and 2024, Canada's 3 largest startup ecosystems, Toronto Waterloo, Vancouver, and Montreal, collectively lost $66 billion in ecosystem value relative to global peers, representing 133,000 fewer high-quality startup jobs. Our ecosystems grew at 2.2% a year, compared to the UK at 13%, France at 17%. The report identifies a $141 million gap at the seed and pre-seed stage nationally, and a $181 million gap at Series A. And critically, the data confirms what this community has long understood. Series A gaps are inherited from seed stage deficits. I'll say that again because my son was just talking to me. Series A gaps are inherited from seed stage deficits. Strengthen the foundations and the benefits cascade forward. Today's session brings perspectives on the end-to-end capital pipeline we need to build. To fuel the next wave of economic growth, we need pre-seed and seed stage funding gaps to be addressed, to be a high priority, because we know that gaps at the pre-seed and seed stage of funding hinder the formation of high-growth companies. The role that early stage capital, patient pre-institutional capital, and networks play in preparing founders for the high-pressure institutional environment that follows. And so it's very important, and we're seeing this in the development of policy, a more sophisticated understanding that the pre-institutional, the pre-seed and seed stage of the capital pipeline is distinct from the later stage, from the institutional phase. You'll hear from industry leaders across the capital pipeline over the course of today's session, and all of this, including your questions today and emails after this session, will contribute to how we fill those gaps at the pre-seed and seed stage. Over the next hour, we have 3 panels. The first looks at the relationship between pre-seed and seed stage capital and later stage outcomes. What happens when founders have it and what happens when they don't. The second brings the perspective of venture studios who are building and funding companies from the ground up. And the third focuses on what it takes to deploy private capital at scale across different regions of the country. Our first panel is moderated by Sandy Gilbert, CEO of Intergen, with Janet Bannister of Staircase Ventures, and Solon Angel, a serial founder, building an extraordinary company that he'll speak to. And Sandy, I'm going to throw it over to you. Sandy, based in Calgary, doing really extraordinary work, and we're privileged to have all of you with us today. Sandy?
Thanks, Claudio. Great introduction. We are here to talk about what that patient capital can mean to companies accessing capital later on and building huge global companies. So we talk about patient capital as the fuel that carries companies through these earlier stages. But we all know it's more than funding. It's access to networks, guidance, and the right advice at the right time. Janet, from your experience, how does pre-seed and seed capital influence a company's ability to raise and succeed at later stages?
Absolutely. First of all, it's great to be here. I am the founder and managing partner of Staircase Ventures. I have been investing in early stage, i.e. pre-seed and seed stage companies in Canada for the past 12 years. As you say, it's not just about capital. It's also about the guidance that we provide companies. Staircase Ventures is known for unparalleled focus on founder development, but it's also not just about founder development. It's about the guidance that experienced venture capitalists can provide to companies in terms of how to grow, how to scale, who to hire, and very importantly, how to raise the next round. I think one point that I would like to make that I think is essential for everybody on this call to understand is pre-seed and seed stage investments are a local game. And what I mean by that is that investing at the pre-seed and seed stage is done by investors that are geographically close to the companies for a host of reasons.
Very well said.
And as a result, when I listened to Claudio speak, one thing that really resonated with me is this is Canada's problem or opportunity to solve. We cannot look to anybody else. While at the later stages, we do have international investors coming in. This is our opportunity, our problem. We need to own it and we need to solve it by providing more early stage capital to Canadian early stage companies.
Well said, Janet. And Siobhan, you're the founder of Remedian, I believe that's how you say it, but also an investor. So you're doing both sides of the game, as many people do at this stage. On the flip side of what we just talked about, what happens when founders do face those capital gaps early on? They're just about at the stage where they are going to market with their product, but they have trouble accessing capital to actually execute on that. What happens then?
Well, then they have to get creative. They have to get creative with funding angel. So I actually have a vivid story in the back of my head, which I think would have been avoided. There's a company that is doing very well right now. And I'm going to drop the name because the founder tries to be shy, but the name is DashQ, growing very fast. And the founder is a prime story of that. For the first 3 to 4 years, he could not access angel investments. And essentially he ended up taking personal loans because he was really stubborn about it. But luckily what happened, he found an angel. He found a very successful restaurant owner and business owner that took him under his wing. But if that did not happen, it would have been death. He could have not compete. He could not compete. He was going head on to compete with an American-based company that raised $50 million, and he was just getting started. Now that American-based company raised $150 million, but he's beating them because thanks to that one single angel investor, he did really want to make it happen. So what ended up happening is, like I did at the beginning of MindBridge before, he was doing side contract. He was still working as a realtor. He was still building a business, and he had no choice but doing it the scrappy way. I can only dream and imagine what would have happened if there would have been more early backers at that time. We would have ended up with someone raising another $100 million right now. Don't get me wrong. He's building a great business. He's about to raise a series there right now. He went from $300K to millions of dollar revenue in no time, but that took longer. It really held back the growth.
And you're right, speed to market is important at these early stages. So having that capital to give you that fuel to actually concentrate on what you're doing and build your business is really important. Janet, you were going to pop in?
Yeah, so I think I love what Salon said. And what we see when there's not enough capital is one of two things. Either they struggle to raise or they don't raise, as Salon was mentioning. Or often the most determined, highest potential entrepreneurs will move to the Valley. And I can't tell you how many awesome Canadian founders I know that have said to me, Janet, I'm moving to the Valley because it's easier to raise capital there. Again, the seed stage capital is a local game. And so they move to the Valley so that they can access the pre-seed and seed stage capital that's available. And I mean, I don't need to go into how the repercussions of that and the impact on our country as a result.
Because whenever they don't come back.
Exactly. And they create jobs and they create wealth. and they are powering the American economy rather than the Canadian economy.
And let's just, for the last couple of minutes, talk a little bit about the flywheel of your early investors coming in and investing in these companies who then have success. That capital gets returned to those early investors. It gets returned to those founders. What does that do for us, Janet?
It's huge. I like to say success begets success. It's why Silicon Valley continues to be so strong. It's a network effect, as you say. Successful companies, successful folks who come out of that, have capital, can invest not only the capital, but their insights, their wisdom, creates more companies, and it's just a great viral cycle. And frankly, I felt in 2014, 15, 16, Canada was getting that viral cycle. I mean, I would talk to Canadians in the ecosystem and they would be so excited about what was going on. And unfortunately, over the last few years, that rhetoric has changed. And it feels like that flywheel is actually going backwards. And we need to very quickly get it going forwards again, because, as I said, the flywheel goes the other way as well.
It's our problem to solve, and we can solve it, as you said, Janet. So today's call, we have investors, policymakers, ecosystem builders. What is our last word to this community to say, what are we doing right and what are we still missing, and how can they get engaged and make this work for us?
Delon, do you want to go first?
Yes. Well, I think there's one Canadian value that I'd like to reflect on and share. So I'm a 6-time immigrant, built companies in France, in Silicon Valley, and Canada, now immigrated in the US. And there's one thing that is a very strong Canadian value is Canadians care about their neighbors. And they like to get along with their neighbor. And that's where the salvation comes from, the power of community. Right? Community activities allows, for example, I give the story of Lance Lackey from Graphite Ventures. He ran into me before I incorporated my last venture at a community event in a cold without a heater in the winter warehouse in Ottawa. And Lance is, like Janet, one of those reactive investors that are always local and know who does what very quickly and keep in touch with people. And I think that's the strength. I think angel investors need to go back at networking in person, in real life. And you will see the people that sometimes are a bit clumsy and don't know how to express themselves, that they do need that 25K check. And that might create a $250 million company. That was my story. That's exactly what happened to me. I was about to move back to, by the way, a fun fact I did not disclose many times in public. I was about to move back to Silicon Valley because I immigrated from Silicon Valley to Canada in 2008. And I was about to move back to start my previous company. And one angel investor came to me and said, don't do that. He says, we can help you. Look at Shopify. Look at the Jatec Scientific. Look at those companies. This is a good place to build. I needed to hear that at that moment. The result was over 100 jobs created in the Ottawa region. A company was more than $200 million just because of that one angel investor, that one check of 25K at an event over coffee, right? Do not underestimate the positive power you have of, hey, you can do it here and we got you. Even if you don't put the check, the introduction to others, even the introduction to clients helps.
Yeah.
Right.
That is so, I remember being introduced to my first customers. The motivation when they said yes was 100 times more powerful than a 25K check. And then if it comes to 25K check all the way, great. But definitely that community first approach. And Janet's one of those GJOs that, and Claudio, I mean, you have so many great community builders. Fun fact, I'm in Miami today. I met with a few communities here and I told them, you guys are doing it wrong. Can you just do it better?
Okay.
That's awesome. And
Janet, I'm going to let you take it home.
Okay. What I would say is this discussion is not about early stage capital for tech companies. It is much larger than that. It is about Canada's prosperity for the future. One of the reasons why Canada is falling behind in terms of our productivity is because our economy is very heavily weighted towards natural resources and not strongly enough weighted towards technology. We need to fix that. And we need to fix that at the first stage. You can't graduate, university students if you've got a broken primary school system. We need to double down. It's our problem to fix, or I would like to say it's our opportunity to address, to ensure that this country has the tech giants that's going to propel us into the future. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Sholon. So next up, we have Emily and Rachel Zimmer. Really great discussion. What stood out there was the power of community. And we are a smaller nation by population, but collectively, we are a very powerful nation. And what we need to find, and what's very powerful about the pre-seed and seed stage and the pre-institutional phase, is that it exists in all communities. And it's not clustered in the major dense urban centers. And we know that great founder, no big city has a monopoly on great founders. So by bringing in the venture studio perspective, Emily and Rachel, venture studios are hybrid in the sense that they have hybrid characteristics. You're both building, and I know, Rachel, some of the work that you've done, and you, Emily, as well, and actually doing the work of getting the company off the ground. And then at the other side, you also know what it means to raise capital and the pain points. And then you've seen your entrepreneurs struggle and go on to raise capital. So maybe to kick things off, and I'll throw it to you, Emily, you've been doing this for a very long time, finding IP-rich companies out of the universities and helping them to commercialize. Can you speak to your journey or those companies' journey as it relates to fundraising and the relationship between the pre-institutional phase and how that positions companies for success later?
So as you mentioned, like the venture studios, we're working with especially Tandem Launch. I've been doing this for 15 years. So I've been doing it for a very long time. So we're in contact with the universities, we find an IP and we build a leadership team. And that's what the venture studios do in terms of helping the companies. So the leadership team, the product market fit, and we help them also in terms of IP strategy. So basically what we do is we're trying to build a fundable company. They have the help of the operational people at Tandem Launch to build a company that would be fundable. And despite all this help and the fact that we've been doing it for such a long time, just to give you an idea, we created like 40 companies in Canada and they're worth more than 700 million. So we've graduated and raised a lot of rounds of financing. I think I must have done between 50 and 70 rounds of financing. It's still a huge challenge for those founders to raise the first round of capital. And there are multiple reasons for this. The first one is everybody wants traction, but when you're building a deep technology company or when you're trying to commercialize IP from universities, sometimes you need to raise that round where the product is not ready. The traction is not there. So there's that gap where the company is not exactly ready for the institutional investors or doesn't have everything that's required to meet the KPIs that the investment community is asking for. So whether it's angels or a group of angels or early stage VCs, people need to learn to take more risks if we want to have more early stage companies growing in deep technology. The second challenge is really finding a lead. So finding a lead investor in Canada is not easy. A lot of investors prefer co-investing with other investors than leading. And what I mean by leading is you need to price the round, you need to be a domain specialist, you need to do the due diligence. It requires time, it requires to create momentum and to attract the other investors. And the fact that we don't have enough people, enough institutionals or enough VCs or angels that are willing to raise their hand slows down that process. So a lot of founders need to raise small rounds of convertible notes, and they end up like fundraising for years instead of actually building the business. And it also creates the lack of velocity and why founders are going to go to other ecosystems where they can raise their rounds more rapidly. So that's like those challenges are the one that I see on a daily basis, and that I think that we should be working on if we want to speed up and the velocity of the early stage ecosystem.
Really interesting thoughts, and I'll share a couple of perspectives. So first off, Claudio, thank you so much for having me here. In addition to Emily, I'm co-founder and CEO of Simple Ventures, and we build companies, I think a little bit different than Tandem Launch. We are focused on really, really fast speed to market. So my team and I actually look for opportunities, we vet ideas, and then once we get enough conviction in a specific opportunity, revenue, very strong market signal, we go and recruit a founder to partner with us to build and we're very fortunate to be backed by some of the very, the best folks across Canada, like founders and leaders of Shopify, Nix, Simple, TD, Sobeys, Sun Life, and a bunch of others. So it's been, a really good journey. We've launched and funded 4 companies so far, on track to do another 6 in the next 12 to 18 months. That's kind of a bit about Simple Ventures and a quick background on myself. I'm a former founder, scaled and sold a business, and then I was a VC for a global business. So I've got a kind of a diverse perspective where I worked for a global business with global investors. I've built and chose to scale a company that was Toronto headquartered, and then now have chosen to venture build here in Canada. So I'd say the challenges are a couple fold. One is I think that venture is a great model for building some companies, but it's not the only path to build. And I think that we need to be really thoughtful about helping founders with many different paths. Now that could be, some forms of different types of funding. That could be a venture studio type model. I think having more options is a huge need in our market. If you look at, success stories south of the border, there's a lot of programs right out of university that's taking the best and brightest, having them cohabitate, in hacker house style things, and then giving them everything from community network support and whatnot. So, when we co-founded Simple Ventures, really the idea was how do we bring distribution, how do we bring capital, and how do we bring support to founders? And really the underlying value proposition for a founder to build with us and stay in Canada is will increase your probability of success and stack the cards in your favor. So if you were to go it alone, if you were to move to a different market, just a riskier endeavor versus the path of building with Simple. So those are a couple of thoughts. The only other thing I was going to mention, we brought up the idea of patient capital a couple times so far on this call. And I think patient capital can mean a lot of things to different folks. And I think one might take away that patient means slow capital. And I don't think that's right. I think patient capital is all about discipline and building a good capital efficient business that has good unit economics and making sure you're capitalizing the business in a thoughtful and methodical way and making sure we have the funding structure and capital pipelines that allow for that is, how I interpret the idea of patient capital and what we need more of across the country.
That's a great point. And what's interesting with Simple Ventures is that I think it represents the flywheel effect. We had Joe Canavan, NACO Angel Investor of the Year 2025, write the first $250,000 check into Wealthsimple, a founder that was going to do the impossible. And he did. And he built a company that now has $100 billion in assets under administration, $10 billion valuation. And Mike Katchen is a co-founder of Simple Ventures. So how it speaks to how an angel gives an opportunity to an entrepreneur who then goes on to achieve great success and then becomes an angel. And that's how you get a properly functioning flywheel effect. Emily, where I'd like to go is you intersect quite a lot with angel investors across the Quebec ecosystem, doing a lot of really great work. One of the questions, I have been monitoring the Q&A, and one question was how do we develop more leads? And so here I'll try to set the stage on this. What I've seen over the last 7 years that I've been in my role is that there's been a tremendous amount of policy work, VCAP and Vicky, more than $2 billion focused on the later stage. Really great work by the funds of funds, helping to energize our venture capital ecosystem. And so where policy goes, the private sector tends to follow in Canada, and we've seen extraordinary success. At the pre-seed and seed stage, what's occurred is that there's been a little bit of a siphoning. We've lost institutional knowledge at the earlier stage. People that could be contributing their domain expertise as leads at the pre-seed and seed stage have moved further along into the pipeline where the policy has favored. So I'm optimistic that with this $750 million commitment to the early stage and this more sophisticated understanding of how all the pieces fit together and the critical role of pre-seed and seed, we'll start institutionalizing or building the infrastructure that allows for more domain expertise. But maybe, Emily, you could drill down on that particular point around a lead and the institutional knowledge and the interplay there.
Yes. So first of all, Tandem Knowledge, we have like 4 funds, just so that everybody understands. So almost 100 million under management and more than 120 angels. So it's a world that I really know because they're part of the funds. But we also work with a lot of angel groups across Canada and even in the States, because they're the number one group of people that are leading the deals when they graduate from Tandem. As I said, we've had like 35, 40 companies graduating. A lot of them were led by angels. One of the challenges that we have is, first of all, you need a domain expert in deep tech. So somebody that can understand the technology. you also need the personality, the person who's going to raise their hand, create momentum. There's a part that you can learn, but there's also part of leadership skills that you would require from an angel. And what happens is the ones that led deals, and it's one of the challenge that we have with working with angel like investors, and we're successful at it. So we just sold a company and everybody made a lot of money like a month ago, like 6x, 7x for the angels. It took 12 years. So if you're a senior angel and you've been doing this for a while, you realize that, hey, I led that deal. I did make some money, but it took 12 years for me to get my money back. So it's not tomorrow morning that you're going to do this right. And in the middle, you've had like a few near-death experience. Like every startup that I know had like a few near-death experience, the challenge of the liquidation preferences, the VCs coming in, like the dilution. So that's why we need some kind of incentives for those people to continue to raise their hand, or to put some kind of market for the secondary, or some kind of incentive that would encourage the angel to recycle the capital that they made out of those investments. Because between the time that it takes and the right, I mean, I think it's going to be that's one of the challenge why we don't have like that many leads. They do it 2 or 3 times and then they're like, oh, I'm going to wait until I get my money back. So that I do another one. And yeah, so that's one of the ways that I would try to solve that issue of the lead in Canada.
Yeah, and maybe, Rachel, any commentary on that? And what I'm thinking about here is, as companies graduate out of Simple Ventures, and I get that Simple Ventures is earlier in its journey as a venture studio, but as companies graduate out, how do we think about those next rounds of capital that they'll be raising, and how are you planning for that?
It's a great question. I think we've built for Canada. So our thesis is all around building the next generation of great Canadian companies. And so how we capitalize them, what our growth strategy is for them, is it just looks a little bit different than typical venture. And so what we've reverse engineered is this idea of like one big growth round per business. And that should be, once we've seen meaningful success, a few million in revenue potentially, that's when we would inject some additional growth capital to it. And what's come to light is really trying to bring strategics to the table that can unlock distribution as well as capital. And so that's been a big strategy for us. When you think of just like some of the players around the table for us, whether it's the Sun Life or Sobeys, there's massive unlocks from a retail perspective, from a health perspective. And so if you're a founder, we have a few health businesses in our portfolio in the senior care space and the postnatal space. All of a sudden, when you can marry those two things together, it gives that company an unfair advantage. And so we're trying to be creative and think differently given the market nuances and given the incentive structure, because I completely agree with everything Emily shared. I think we need more incentives to, bring angels to recycle capital into the market. And so where we can, we're trying to find that really strategic alignment specifically with like large corporates to drive distribution as well as that capital piece.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Rachel. Really enjoyed your perspectives.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, I'd like to invite Ian Lane, Executive Director at Northern Ontario Angels, and Randall Howard, General Partner, Adrenaline Fund and Archangel Network of Funds. Randall, you're an exited entrepreneur that has gone on to be a super angel, and you're operating within a fund structure, and you've done really great work at G10, one of our great networks across the country. And then Ian, in a community of 700,000, some fly-in communities, your organization, Northern Ontario Angels, has mobilized more than 200 million. And so on a per capita basis, that would take us to over 10 billion of fresh capital deployed at the pre-seed and seed stage. I'd love to maybe kick things off with you, Ian, to talk about the Northern Ontario success story and what we can learn from it as we think about the design of this $750 million commitment to filling early stage growth gaps.
Thanks, Claudio. Thanks for the opportunity to share my perspective. So I've been leading Northern Ontario Angels for 24 years now, and the organization's been around for almost 21. So we've been able to build a strong brand recognition out there within our presence in Northern Ontario. And I'd like to share that our territory starts in Parry Sound, Muskoka, goes to the border of Manitoba, goes into parts of rural and remote, like you said, fly-in, fly-out communities, First Nation communities across the region. And I think what's interesting about our region is that, we've often experienced out migration, brain drain to other parts of the country or folks that are leaving. And so the concept of our angel investing, I think a lot of our investors have appreciated that, yeah, they want a return on the investment, of course, but their investment is also enriching and building communities. And so that feature that Salon shared around Canadians being good neighbors and being community builders, I think that's a really distinct and appreciative feature of Northern Ontario Angels, is that the investments are going to be making a difference within our host communities. And another thing that I like to share around that, the money that's been leveraged, a colleague and I, we always share that when we were here, entrepreneurs going, access to capital in Northern Ontario was really hard. Well, that's a quick way of us to triage, maybe not helping them out because they haven't done their due diligence. We have impressive programs in Northern Ontario through the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation, FedNor, our city where I live in Sudbury, the Greater Sudbury Development Corporation, that we can stack our angel investing on top to really quickly to get that early capital in really efficiently for companies. So the money that the money that our angels have put in is being de-risked because there's other partners at that earlier stage that have helped bring in our investors. So just wanted to highlight that. It's one of my other colleagues always says that angel investing is a team sport. And so, yeah, we're very proud of what we've contributed, but it's also through wonderful partnerships with key funding agencies at that early stage up here.
That's great. It's an extraordinary success. And Randall, I know that we used a term in the invitation to all of you that are listening. We used the term capital stack, and I would credit that to a session that you invited me to up in Kitchener-Waterloo that you delivered with Peter from Lumera Ventures. It was in that session that you and Peter were discussing the end-to-end pipeline, and Peter mentioned the importance of the full capital stack as it relates to policy development. Randall, you cut across a wide variety of areas as an entrepreneur, super angel, and fund manager. Any commentary on Ian's reflections around incentivizing and mobilizing angel capital in communities that might otherwise be overlooked?
Well, I think it's really important. I think that starting with COVID and, the new onslaught we've seen to challenge Canada for us to up our game like never before, we are seeing a lot more cross-Canada work. So we are working together as angels and angel funds across the country, in smaller communities, in larger communities, everywhere where we're rebuilding the economy. So absolutely agree. And I would say that, Janet made a point that this is more than capital. This is actually building the future of Canada. Canada has a reputation of being risk averse, low risk appetite. We certainly don't see that in our entrepreneurs that are building moonshots, but sometimes the traditional financing people sort of suck the air out of the room and let that happen. Likewise, we talk about and worry about our productivity. Productivity is not going to be fixed by our megacorps. It's going to be fixed by collectively all of these startups that are reinventing how we do things, and now across a range of sectors, whether it's Emily's deep tech and whether it's the types of businesses being built by Simple Ventures. We're certainly seeing like going to Peter and Lumera in medical and health and life sciences, we're seeing about 35% of the deals coming through our fund, which is driven by what's coming through the angel ecosystem, is that type of deal. What's interesting about that is that takes a very different skill set than the traditional software SaaS that might have one time been 90%. So I think my perspective over the long haul, I did start out in institutional capital, but in the early 2000s, after having taken a company public and working with venture capitalists, and as our traditional venture capital ecosystem kind of imploded, I got heavily involved in the angel ecosystem and was involved with a group of people founding Golden Triangle Angel Net, which is one of the top angel groups in the country, doing 40, 50, 60 deals a year. But what we realized in that exercise is that we realized we had to work together as an ecosystem. And so the work that I've been doing when we founded Archangel Network of Funds, which are 4 funds targeted to the early seed and pre-seed stage. And the largest fund that I'm involved with, the Adrenaline Fund, is effectively a rules-based fund that does 10 investments a year. So 5 years into Archangel, we have done 130 investments into 80 different companies. Adrenaline has done 50 companies of those. And the cool thing about that is that capital structured as a fund is very catalytic to the other forms of angel organization, whether it's individual angels, whether it's angels in angel groups. We all work together. They're not separate entities. And by working together, it's very synergistic. And then secondly, working together across Canada. So I think that coming to the topic at hand, the funds, the 750 million is going to help unlock nationwide building an ecosystem to the next level that will build the future of the country. And so I think we've got a lot of that experimentation individuals working out. We just need to dial it up a factor of 10 for us to lead the world in innovation economy.
Ian, when I think about the Northern Ontario experience, I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into ensuring that the 5 distinct communities within Northern Ontario are connected. And my sense is that that has contributed to the success of Northern Ontario Angels and on a per capita basis, mobilizing more angel capital than virtually any other regional ecosystem or angel network in North America. In 2019, Northern Ontario Angels was recognized by both NACO and our sister organization in the United States as the most active angel network in both the US and in Canada. And so can you speak to, maybe we'll tie it into more of the national framework, but we're thinking around the pre-seed and seed stage around how can we create the conditions that an entrepreneur in one region can gain access to capital from investors in other regions. And we know that deal syndication across angel networks is a big part of that. So what can we learn from the Northern Ontario experience around pooling capital across distinct parts of the country?
Yeah, it is an interesting feature that we have because, I kind of chuckle sometimes. Somebody mentioned to me recently that I could just pop over and see Mary Long Irwin in Thunder Bay. And no, just because it looks that big on a map, it's a 12-hour drive, right? So our challenge is always how do we shrink a large region, which is the size of, it's larger than France and England combined, with a population that's left to 1 million. So I think, around that spirit where, there's unique skill sets. We talked about, expertise in traditional industries in the previous talk. We've seen that come to fruition in a lot of the early investments from our angels into, mining innovation, medical innovation, life sciences. And really it's, if somebody in Thunder Bay can support a company that's based in North Bay, even though that's 14 hours away, we want to make that connection because it's going to serve the founders really, really well. And it's going to help the investors, and it'll give that flywheel effect that we've heard in a couple of the different panels where that investor will say, hey, there's some really cool stuff happening in our region. We want to bring other angels to participate into it. And so, we're afforded a lot of time to spend with our investors and through training and education, and with our founders through our long-term partnership with FedNor, the Regional Development Agency through the Government of Canada. That allows us to go with a bunch of different methodologies to make those connections happen at an earlier stage, so that when our founders are going to seek the capital, we prime them on what to expect. We prime them on the investors that are going in front of. We prime the investors to make sure that there's a harmony or efficiency in that capital raise process. But that's afforded to us given the operating model that we've had for 20 years through FedNor. But, around the syndication part of it, where we have these, and each of our communities have their own distinct features and theses, if you will, around their investment portfolio. I think there's a genuine spirit in Northern Ontario that our region is important. A lot of the major projects that in the mining sector are based here in the north, and the rest of the country has benefited from the resources that are here. And so there's a civic undercurrent. There's that community driven ethos to bringing people together that is also echoed what I said earlier about that community fabric within our network. And so it takes a lot of time to bring investors from the different communities together. We're lucky we have the operating model to do that, the resources to do that. But I think there is genuinely, almost to Randall's point, like this is a national strategy. Ours happens to be a regional strategy where there is definitely a feeling, the heartstrings of our investors to go, we need to come together to enrich our region, and, not to be, cliche or anything like that, but really rising tides lift all boats. And we're really fortunate that that's been baked into our DNA of our network.
I've been monitoring the chat, and we have a good question from Michelle Sinclair around, and this is something that me and Michelle had talked about years ago, about having a national angel passport. So recognizing that some angels are hyper local, other angels are national. They can invest in many other regions. And then also recognizing that the angel model that NACO pioneered in its early days as an organization that's been around for 25 years, a lot has happened since then. And so making sure that we have national infrastructure across all the angel networks, venture studios, emerging funds, and we also have SPVs, special purpose vehicles that have developed. We have this, the way that we think about it is that we have these rails everywhere, but we don't have a high-speed national railway system for capital mobility. There's a lot of discussion around the nation of builders that we are and the nation of builders that we need to be, but we need to be much more intentional about how we fuel that nation of builders, how we fuel those builders. And the fuel, of course, is capital, and it needs to be end-to-end capital across the country, no matter who you are, no matter where you're located. As a founder, it's important that you have access to all these other points of capital around the country. And of course, that's where the growth comes from, national and then global. Randall, you're uniquely positioned to speak to that as a super angel who I know has been traveling around a lot of parts of the country, helping to drive syndication. Can you speak to some of the discussions that you've had? Nothing confidential, but just generally what's motivating you around that deal syndication?
I think there's a huge opportunity for NACO to help move this agenda forward, because there's some real challenges trying to do it. As we've tried to build organizations, obviously you connect with people, you connect with funds, and you build relationships. So we've co-invested with Emily, with Sandy's organizations, with people out in BC. You don't have a BC one on here, people in Atlantic Canada. So we found organizations and angel groups and funds to work with. But if you start to actually unpack this, we need a national strategy and national rails, as you say, to make that work. And some of that's going to be systems and processes to make it more cost effective and simpler. Some of it could be regulatory. For example, trying to co-invest with BC companies where they have the 30% angel tax credit creates both structural and cost basis differences trying to invest across that. And it's a shame because those BC companies do want to engage with, for example, Ontario or Quebec or other major investors, but there are some barriers. Now, we do it in spite of that. So this is, I think, one of the big opportunities that's going to come out of this, I said, investment in working with NACO to make this happen, is to build this more nationally and to break down the barriers, build systems, and make it happen. And so I think a lot of us know where the bodies are buried and where it's difficult. And it wouldn't take a lot to really make this work better. And I think Canada will be a much more productive, innovative country as a result.
I can't think of a better note to close off on. Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Ian. Thank you to our panelists, Sandy, Janet, Solon, Rachel, Emily, and what a great note to wrap up on. All of you, we really do appreciate you joining. Nearly 1,000 people registered for this event. I've tried to keep on top of the questions. We've addressed as many as we could. We're going to try to find a way to aggregate these questions and ensure that they're informing the policy decisions that follow. Please do keep in touch with us. This is an ongoing process and it's moving in real time. We want to ensure that your voices are represented. We recognize that the voices of the pre-seed and seed stage are not always represented in policy development. And so we're going to be leaning very heavily in that direction to make sure that your voice is heard and that what happens at the pre-seed and seed stage level reaches you, entrepreneurs, so that no matter where you are, no matter what you're building, the capital is there to help you so that we are in fact fueling the nation of builders that we are and that we need to become. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. The ways to get in touch, vision2040.ca. That will bring you to vision.nacocanada.com. And we do have some pieces there, including our unified capital strategy report, which makes recommendations end to end around how we can become the nation of builders that we are and take things to the next stage. We will be sharing the Startup Genome Report next week. It speaks to the opportunity, more than 133,000 jobs that we could be creating and tens of billions of dollars in economic value. I'm hopeful that this conversation has been informative, and I look forward to continue to engage with all of you. And so thank you on behalf of the National Angel Capital Organization. Thank you for all you do and for sharing your time with us. Thanks, everyone.